On the Water Striper Cup tournament is back for 2023. This 5-month catch and release tournament, beginning on May 1st, awards over $150,000 in prizes. Every week offers a chance to win by submitting photos of the striped bass you catch from May to September. When you enter, we'll send you a sign-up package loaded with great gear, and you don't even have to catch a fish to win the grand prize, a new Tidewater 2010 Adventure Center Console. Sign up today at stripercup.com.
Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. I'm Jimmy Fee, and I am fresh off a couple days in New Jersey where I did some fishing and filming with some of my friends down there for videos that are going to be hitting the On the Water YouTube channel over the next couple weeks. And no trip to New Jersey for me is complete without a couple things. One, a pork roll, egg, and cheese. Two, some fishing with Shelly, Caris. If you've been following On the Water closely over the years, you've seen Shell on some of our videos and in our magazine. He was part of our most popular, most viewed fishing episode ever that we put out there, surf fishing for bluefish at Island Beach State Park. He's written a number of articles for the magazine. He's been fishing the New Jersey surf for 69 years. He started out in the 1950s, and he's still going strong today. When I talked to him last week and asked him how often he's still fishing, he goes, every day. Shell and I talked about some of the surf fishing game changers he's seen over the past 7 decades, and he also talked about how the best striped bass fishing he's seen in his whole life has been happening just over the past couple years. I'm Jimmy Fee, and today we are on the road in New Jersey with a good friend of mine, legendary surfcaster down here. He's been doing it for almost 70 years in the New Jersey surf, Shelly Caris. Shell, thank you so much for having us in your home today.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
This room here, this is your kind of your workshop?
This is my go-to. It's my getaway. My wife calls it the fish room. You know, get a glass of wine, tie some flies. I got a TV in here and a ton of memorabilia. I have plugs in here from day one when I started surf fishing in the 50s, into the 60s. You know. So one of our favorite articles that we've run in the magazine over the years was, for me, one of my favorite ones that we've run was 60 Years in the Surf that you wrote for us. And in that you talked about your first ever striped bass and kind of walked us through all the way to today. And I'd like to talk about some of that with you today. Starting with, I know your first striper and your first real big striper, I always thought was cool that your grandmother mounted it for you. Yeah, well, you know, going back in time, my parents, they bought a summer home in Belmar. They were from natives of Newark, New Jersey, and we moved, every summer we go to, Belmar. And one of the neighbors said to my dad, who did a little fishing, more freshwater than saltwater, you should get into saltwater fishing. You live 4 blocks from the ocean. So my dad kind of said, okay, I'm going to do that. He went to a local rod maker in town named George Scheider, and he bought 3 Calcutta rods for $3.50, Jim. And now
Calcutta's bamboo,
well, they're like a bamboo, but they're stronger. There's believe it or not, there's a female and a male Calcutta. The males were a little bit heavier duty. The females were a whippier action, and both were very, very good rods back in the day. And I happen to have all 3 of those rods to this day. So my father and I were on the beach in Belmar. He was a bait fisherman, calico crab guy. And I was 7 years old at that time, and I ended up catching about 7 pounds with the help of him.
Yeah.
He helped me, he casted the crab, and I reeled it in, and he helped me take it off the hook and everything. Then when I was 10, my dad said, you're old enough now, you got to learn how to tie on a calico crab and make a cast with your rod. So I was tying this crab on, and back then we didn't have elastic thread. We had cotton, sewing cotton, that my grandmother would give us because she used to sew, mend things and everything. So I'm tying the crab on, and I'm using excess cotton. And my father goes, what are you doing? You're using too much cotton on that. You're ruining the look of the crab. So I panicked. I stopped doing it. Then he says, cast over the wave. I cast it over the first wave. 10 minutes later, boom, I'm fighting a fish, 28.5 pounds.
And I'm 10 years old.
And I tell everybody after that fish, I was hooked for life. But a quick story on that also. After I landed the fish, I go to my dad, and he was a heavy smoker back then. And I go, Dad, I'm 10 years old. Can I have a cigarette to calm my nerves?
Did he give you one?
No, thank God he didn't. But my mother would tell that story for the next 20 years to everybody. It was comical. That's where it started, back then.
And you had a lot of family support for your fishing. I mean, your grandmother took that let you pay for it to have it mounted.
We had, there was the taxidermy in Wall Township named, I can't, whatever, I can't remember the name specifically, but it was $60 to mount that fish back then. And It's a skin mount. It's in my store, all hand painted, oils and stuff, not like the airbrush stuff that's done today. So that was that fish, and I see it every day when I'm at work.
That's awesome.
And that fish is now, believe it or not, 66 years old.
Oh man.
It didn't grow any bigger though, unfortunately.
So one of the things that really stands out to me about that whole story is the calico crabs, and that's something you don't hear about people fishing for bait anymore, at least up here. And that was a major part of the fishing. It felt like for years and years, I hear about all these stories of bait fishing through the summer in New Jersey, and a lot of fishing those crabs. Tell me a little bit more about what that involved. I mean, you weren't just going down to the bait shop and saying, give me a dozen calicos.
No, some of the local shops back then, my dad would go to a place in Avon that sold him, a place in Braley Beach, Breslin's tackle shop, old school tackle shop. He would rake crabs and sell them. Back then, they would get $0.25 per crab. And that was a lot of money.
That is a lot
back
of money.
then. I'm talking in the 60s, and you could buy shedders, softies, and what we call tinbacks. But you wanted, when we would rake, we would want shedders, because the shedders were like the primary one, and the softies were the primary ones. When the shedders, when you would peel them, they gave, in their shedding process, they have oils that help them lubricate to get out of their shells. But that also had scent, and that was key, because the bass were looking for them, but that scent also brought them like a chum slick. So that's what we were doing back then. And it was a summertime thing. We would, early spring, you would use worms. Clams really didn't play a big part back then. It was more green worms, which is another bait that people don't really know about, that we would dig in the surf shoreline.
Oh, really? Out front?
Out front. Yep. People don't know that particular bait. And they're along the island beach. You could dig them. 99% of the people never see them. Once in a while, they might snag one on like a lure or something like dragging the bottom. No. But it's a sandworm, not the local ones that are in the back bays. The clam worms, they call them.
Yeah.
And it's not a bloodworm. It's a green worm, totally different looking, color-wise. And then it was a deadly bait, just as good as the calico crab.
Oh, man.
But what I was going to say, it was a summertime thing. We would fish for fluke. But a lot of the summers, right now, the water in our summers, the last, let's say, 10 years, is much warmer than back in the day. When I was a kid growing up, I would go swimming, and my mother would go, your lips are blue from the water. It was like 65 degrees. Now you could get a whole summer where it's 70 degrees every day.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of the stripers that we were catching early on moved more north into the colder water.
So there were more resident fish. Yeah,
and then we would switch over to fishing fluke and, taking advantage of that. And then when the fall would come, we would go back into the stripers again.
So you started out with bait fishing, but I know you graduated pretty quickly to throwing artificial lures,
right?
And especially the minnow-style plugs.
Well, what that was about, naturally, when my father was primarily a bait fisherman, he would use a metal, tin squid, a little bit here and there, but he was primarily bait. And again, we were doing it mainly in the summers. And I would go back to Newark and go to school, so I couldn't get that fall run. As I got a little older, not even that point, in 1962, there was a Life magazine article. And a lady on the beach, my family was on the beach, my mom and me, and my brother and other, friends. And in that article was Louis Rapala's Rapala lure. And they brought it into the States in 1962. And it had the article on the way he got them, he balsa wood carved them, and he used a plastic lip, and he would use chewing gum wrapper on the sides of the plug to give it that flash, and he would coat it with film, film from a camera.
Like you melted, like film.
He would melt it and coat it like an epoxy, but using the film, and that was the early stages of the Rapala.
And for that to be in Life magazine, like that had to be a pretty big deal. I can't imagine they were doing very much fishing stuff back then. Life magazine was more kind of slice of life, celebrity type stuff.
The article, I was infatuated. So in '62, I think I was 16 years old when that came out, and I told my father about it, and one of the local shops started carrying Rapalas. We went in there and we bought a couple and we started catching stripers on them. And then as time went on, then Rebel came out. Then that was the first plastic crankbait.
Yeah, were you guys, were the stripers destroying the Rapalas?
I didn't hear it.
Were the stripers kind of destroying the Rapalas?
Oh, yeah. The Rapalas, they would hold up to a degree. They were a little lighter because they were balsa wood. They weren't weighted. They were through wired, though. And so they casted kind of okay, but when Rebel came out, it was a game changer because it was a little more durable, some good colors, a lot of flash, but it was painted on. And a lot of that would wear off. We were doing a lot of jetty fishing, so scratching the plug against the rocks, you would wear a lot of that paint finish. So then the other problem with the Rebels, a lot of them weren't true out of the package. Some would swim good, some wouldn't swim good. So we actually want to pick the ones that swam well, that they had an issue because it was a two-part plug. They had a lip that was separate from the body of the plug that was glued on. And they would tend to leak and fill up with the cavity of water. The action would be destroyed. So we would try to shake out the water and then hit it with nail polish and try to seal it because epoxies really weren't, around at that time. So we would do that, coat it a couple of times, and it kind of worked for a while. And then from that point, you had Hellcats come out, which was another good one, but that also had a separate lip.
So it's same problem as the inconsistency?
Same problem to a degree.
Guys today with the SP minnows can't imagine having to deal with that. You buy 10 plugs and 6 don't work,
Right. So after the Hellcats, on a jetty in Belmar, and I see a guy making a cast with a lure, and it's going through the water, gin clean water. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, what the heck is he throwing? So I walked up to him. I was like in my maybe 20 or 18 or 20, whatever that time frame was. And I go, what lure is that you're using? He goes, it's called a redfin. And I go, where'd you get that? He says, Bob Kislin's, which was in Asbury Park. Really good tackle shop, sporting goods store. So I was driving at that time, so I shot up there. I was living in Belmar, so I went up to Asbury, 10-minute ride. And I go up to the counter, and Bob Kislin was the owner. And I go, do you have those redfin lures they're talking about? And he, real like secretive almost, he goes behind the counter and he grabs this red box and takes the plug out. And he grabs the hooks with his hand and bangs the lip on the counter a number of times and says, these won't leak.
Oh, yeah.
And I go, that's interesting. And then I went down the next day to, I think, the same jetty that I saw the guy on. I think 2 casts later, I had an 18-pounder on it. And they changed the way we fish with crankbaits. From there, after the bombers came out, then actually SP minnows, hydro minnows. So this is like an evolution from the 60s to the present. And it's basically the same lure. Just,
Yeah, everybody adds their own little spin to it, improves it a bit.
Yeah.
Now, of the ones, do you have like nostalgia for the red fins, or are you happier throwing the SP minnows? You still throw some of the old stuff, or?
I would say the SP minnow now. Yeah. The main reason it's 2 hooks versus 3 trebles. Mm-hmm. I was always against that 3-hook version.
Yeah, you might need it for largemouth bass, but stripers are
just too many hooks, and you don't really need it. And bomber was the same way. I'd rather fish 1 treble on a plug today, if I have to have a treble hook on it. But the SP minnow was definitely a game changer, and the hydro minnow in the same category. And colors, bone, changed the way we fished. We never used bone color lures back early on. White, naturally. Yeah. But bone became a home run over the last number of years.
So in terms of the striper fishery, you were out doing this at its previous height in the 60s and 70s. How's that compare to what you have now?
Well, the 60s and the 70s, when I went to Monmouth College, I was down the shore all the time, so I could fish the falls and the springs. Because when I was younger, I was back in school, and I didn't get the opportunity until, let's say, the end of June when school let out. So in that time period, let's say 64, 65, we were doing a lot of herring fishing, live herring, which naturally you can't do today. They're protecting the alewives and the bluebacks, and it's a good thing. But back then, we would store up in pens 200, 300 baits for a season. And if we would go to a local jetty with, I would have bait in my tank in my truck, but if I walk out on a jetty with a bucket with 2 herring in there, I would walk back with 2 stripers. That's how effective herring fishing was. And they were resident fish. Every jetty had resident fish, and you would just jump along. And naturally, I did Barnegat Inlet's North Jetty because I moved to Toms River. from Belmar. So that was the 60s and the 70s, and it was pretty consistent right through even to the 90s. And then naturally, Barnegat Inlet was a hot spot for me. In that time frame, most of the activity and the bigger fish were caught on the North Jetty, and we would throw big plugs, live eels, and we would fish live herring and bunker in the early spring. So that was kind of that time frame. To the present, it's been a game changer this season, and we'll talk about that probably at the end of this talk.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where that started.
The herring fishing, I was getting really into surf fishing at the time when that was starting to fade.
Right.
Like I still remembered guys with the aerators hooked up to the car batteries in the back of their trucks, and they would be, you'd fill up a 5-gallon bucket with water, throw the herring in, keep it alive, run to the tip of the jetty, catch it, get a fish, go back and get another one. Like it was a whole.
We used to Barnegat's a very long jetty.
Yeah.
And we would park our trucks facing the inlet naturally, get 2 baits, walk to the tip, and God forbid you got chopped by a bluefish. But that was like suicide. You go, oh my God. And then, we were a group of guys that were friends and everything. So if somebody had to go back for a bait, we go, bring 2, bring an extra one.
Yeah.
So that helped, if you were with your buddies. But legitimately, if you took 12 herring down to the jetty, you could have 12 runoffs and a number of fish. And the quality was all decent size. I'm going to say 15-pound was a small one, and we had them up to 50 pounds, guys. I was not fortunate enough to get one that big. I had one that might have been 60 on a bunker. I'll tell that story if you want.
Yeah, let's get to that in a minute, man. I just want to talk a little bit about the herring fishing, because that is something that a lot of guys have never experienced it, and the way it looks may never experience it. But there's something about those baits. They're nice and soft. They're a perfect size. Like stripers seem like they can't help themselves when there's live herring.
The interesting thing, it was a challenge to get bait. It was a commitment.
Now, would you do like the Deal Flume?
I went to Deal, Flume. We did Delaware Bay, the Delaware River. That was a hot spot. You were allowed 50 there. And we would go down. I would go from here all the way down there in the morning and get 50 baits and bring them to my pen and then go to work day after day. Because you wanted to store up at least a few hundred early on. And the water was still cold, so they would hold really well. When the water got warmer, you would start losing bait in your pens.
Yeah.
So we would go and replenish, and then after we had pumps naturally, and aeration systems, piston pumps, and I got a 50-gallon drum in my back of live bait in my back of my car, my trucks all the time. And it was crazy fishing, but like you said, it was the visual sights of the fish blowing up on them. Like the bunkers today to a degree, but you worked for it. It was it wasn't where you went and got or snagged the bait real easily and threw it back in the water. No, you got them, stored them up, put them in your tank, went here, and it was.
But it was worth the effort. I mean,
without a doubt. The quality was there, and we were younger and we had that drive to do it. Today I don't know if I could do it every day. I would have to do it every other day.
Yeah. I mean, I asked you today. So we started out this morning. We went fishing for some bluefish, and I asked you. I said, "How many days a week you fishing?" You said, "Every one this week." So.
Yeah, I did. And if I have the opportunity to go and the conditions are right, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And I'm selective to a degree. I don't do a lot of the night fishing like I did back in the day. But the fisheries changed. Daylight fishing became more important, to be honest. In the 60s, 70s, 80s. I would start at dark and fish, most of the night, and then come home, get a few hours sleep, and then go to work. It was the most productive time, and it still is that way today, to a degree. But when we get the migration of bait, daytime fishing improves drastically.
So you had all the herring fishing in the 60s and 70s, and great fishing then. In the 80s, it's pretty widely known that the striped bass population wasn't doing so well in the 1980s. A lot of guys said they saw way fewer fish. Was that your experience too down here?
They tried to protect the 86 year class. We used to go to meetings, and they were trying to put a moratorium in effect and all of that, but that year class was weak. So, but our fishing wasn't that bad. I mean, on Island Beach, the 80s into the early 90s, we had great sand eel runs. And I remember, with Island Beach, I would fish, Gilligan's, and we would walk towards the governor's mansion up that way. My plug bag would have a yellow bomber, and the rest were needlefish because of the sand eels. And, you didn't have the tsunami eels. You didn't have a lot. I had rigged eels that I had, which I did well with, the rubber femlies. But needlefish was our top getter, and when the sand eels were around. And that was all through the 80s and into the 90s when we had great sand eel runs. And that would last every fall. And then naturally, if the bait changed, you would switch it up. If you had rainfish, you would maybe use a metal lip swimmer or poppers. And then naturally, adult bunker and peanut bunker runs, they varied every year. So that was the primary thing in that time frame, was definitely sand eel bites.
And that kind of came around again, I'd say in the 2010s. You saw the sand eel runs happen for a few years, and then
just to backtrack for a second, Ocean County was the first place to start needlefish. A lot of people don't realize it originated down here. And in 68, I was living in Belmar still, and I rode down to Island Beach. We heard they're catching stripers, and I went to a tackle shop. It was Gene and Art's bait and tackle, all-time tackle shop. So we're in there with a buddy of mine, and we go, I heard they're catching stripers. What are they using? And he goes, they're catching them on needlefish. And I go, needlefish? What's a needlefish? I had no clue, and I was pretty up on, creek chub surfsters and, different plugs, the Rebels and all that kind of stuff. And he said, here, try these two. So he gave my buddy one, a grandpa, like a fluorescent orange color, which I go, I don't know what that's supposed to imitate. And he gave me a smaller one, like a silver flash color with some glitter on it. And he says, go right up to the street, 24th Ave or whatever. And that's where, they're getting some. And this is midday, like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sun, low tide. So we drove the car up there. We didn't have four-wheel drives back then, and drove up, walked out onto the beach. We each had, I think, 4 or 5 schoolies, like 18 and 24-inch fish on needlefish. So that was my first experience using that kind of lure.
And that was in 68?
That was in 68. Then buddies of mine would go up to Nantucket every year. And back then, in Nantucket in June was a hot fishery for stripers. And they would use hellcats and weighted redfins. They would load them. It's like 7 cc's of a liquid on the big 7-inch. The smaller ones may be unweighted, but that was a go-to lure. My buddies, they introduced needlefish up there. So one day they're slaying them in the dark. This is all in the dark now. My buddies they're catching fish after fish, and there's a group of anglers, like I'm going to say 50 yards up, not even. And they see my buddies' lights going on, off. They're putting fish back, and these guys are like wondering what they're using. All of a sudden, my buddy gets tangled with one of those guys. So
it's
now,
the oldest trick in the book, right there.
Trick. Well, it didn't go over good. So the guy reels in. So my friend figured, well, I'll open my bail, let the line go towards him, and he'll take it off, and I'll reel it in. He'll say, you're good or whatever, and reel in. All of a sudden, he starts reeling. The guy cuts his line. So my buddy used every word in the book. I know this is a podcast. I don't want to curse. But you can imagine the words that he used. You this, blah, 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 blah. They wanted to kill the guy.
Oh,
so
man.
that was the start of needlefish, to be honest. And then I think Musso's came out in the late 80s, right? Or 82 or 83.
I know it was right around those big Block Island years. So the mid 1980s that there's... I don't know all the details, but I hear the legends. I know bits and pieces of it. Like they were calling from Block Island to Donnie Musso and saying, we need bigger needlefish that are heavier to stand up to those fish that they were hooking out there.
That makes sense, because ours were smaller in design.
Were they Boone's?
Boone was the first one. And what happened, Boone, they stopped making them. It was a period there. And then John Bichelle Sr. had classic lures. So he copied the Boone shape and style.
From Betty and Nick's?
From Betty and Nick's.
Oh, okay. So he was the first New Jersey lure maker to make one?
There was a period when Boone stopped offering them. If you had some, you were lucky. So now some people would make their own out of a dowel, naturally, if they could, handy enough to do it. So then John Bichelle saw the opportunity to really make needlefish and sell them. So he opened a company called Classic Lures. And the reason for Classic Lures, he was a classic car fanatic. Oh. So he got that name, and he teamed up with a guy, Matt Mallard, who was a really good carpenter and good plug guy, knew how to do things, and they started offering him, and then they caught tons and tons of fish. Then Boone came back on to the market, and then Stan Gibbs came out with the needlefish later on. Naturally, the early Mussos were wood. They weren't plastic.
And they were bigger too. One of the different things about the Musos is they were tapered at either end.
Right.
Whereas the Gibbs and the others were kind of more flared. They had the narrow nose.
The Gibbs copied Boone, and so did Classic. They had that. And that Boone was technically a Florida lure for snook. And people don't realize that's where that came from. That wasn't a local lure at all. And it just, I don't know, whoever started using them for what reason up here, and they caught on. And then, today, every custom plug maker tries to imitate them and make them,
I wonder if anybody still throws them for snook. I wonder if it's needlefish, if they originated for snook, but they caught on with stripers.
I'm pretty sure that's where they were designed for.
Because I've seen some of the old packaging, and that's what it is. It's like snook, trout, reds, redfish.
That's exactly what they would do. It could catch every one of those fish.
Yeah.
And they were great. Weakfish love them too. Needlefish caught weakfish really well, because I guess it's that twitching, slow motion, and they could take advantage of it. And
slender weakfish love smaller baits. Slender baits.
When they're on sand deals, they get very selective in their feeding habits. You're not going to throw a pencil popper or big metal lip. You're going to want to throw something that's going to look like that sand deal. I'm always a firm believer in matching the hatch. I want to know what bait they're on. You always get that oddball plug, and you'll hear of an isolated fish caught on something different. But to be consistent, I want to use that.
Now, speaking of matching the hatch, one of the biggest hatches that would always happen every fall, and you don't hear anything about it anymore, was the mullet run. Was that a big part of your falls?
Back in the day, yes. Yeah. Every September, like I always would say, the 10th of September, right after Labor Day, the mullet would start showing that first cold northwest wind we would get. That chilled night, 40-degree temperatures, they would start leaving the bay. And back in the 80s and 90s, the water was colder then. Like I always tell people that this past fall, it wasn't mullet at the time, but there was the Menhaden. The bunkers were so thick. Now this is November 20th, and I'm fishing for, with a metal lip swimmer, and there's people swimming in the water near me in November the 20th.
That's
so you
crazy.
can imagine how the timing of the temperature changed. But back then, the mullet run this past year, to answer your question, we had a good mullet run for about 4 weeks, no stripers with them. Very, very few.
So they're leaving before the bass are here in any numbers.
The bass are not there yet, and they just come through. You may get some cocktail blues mixed. A couple seasons we had that for a while.
But it used to be a big event, right? Like
if there was a northeaster in the end of September, early October, we'd be on that jetty and we would have mullet runs, and the bass would just be blowing up on them like crazy, day after day. But this past year, not good. But every year is different. You never know. I mean, you get faked out. It's not an exact science, Jim. If it was, they'd be all gone.
But that hatch you had that last fall was peanut bunker and adult bunker. So
it was a combination, and it lasted like day after day, right from October. I think it was around the 8th. We had giant stripers that week.
And in all I remember you told me this. You said this was the best fall ever.
By far, yeah.
69 falls in the surf, and last year was the best one.
There were some that were phenomenal. I'm not going to say there wasn't. We had that sand eel bite a number of years back, and that was like the whole month of November into December and into January a little bit. But the size of the fish were decent. But this year, the amount of bass, the size of the fish, and how consistent it was, and the fact that they were on top water, a lot of it. Metal lip swimmers was the choice lure, and poppers, and they were getting on this as a shads and stuff at times, but that was it.
It just seemed like they didn't want to leave. Like they found the bait was, all the stars aligned perfectly. You had the right water temperature, you had the bait, you had the fish coming down at that time, and there wasn't bait offshore to hold them there, so all the bait was right on the beach. And,
we were fortunate, and it wasn't just Island Beach, it was more north of us. I did a lot of Sandy Hook and Seabright. And, we're communicating. There's a lot of, naturally the internet, helps to a degree. But, if you have a group of friends from different locations, they'll say, hey, I'm here, there's action in a certain spot. And, we communicate and share it with our friends. And, the days of fishing alone are over. I mean, the people that get upset about spot burning, I don't know. I mean, I think they should get over that. Enjoy it and share it.
To an extent, there was probably always that.
I mean, I'm not going to say, just put it on the news, the Channel 4 News tonight.
So, Shell, we talked a little bit about those first surf rods that your dad bought that you still have. I mean, you've seen tremendous changes in the tackle and the lures and just pretty much everything surrounding surf fishing. What have been some of the most significant kind of game changers along the way?
Well, there's been numerous ones, but real quick, I would say graphite rods kind of changed the way we fish. I mean, I caught, well, backtracking, the first graphite rod I saw was in Betty and Nixon. This guy, Frank Mazza, had it, and he shows it to me, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I go, "No, it's a nice stick, you know." He goes, "It's $100." And I go, $100? I'm not spending $100 on a surf rod. My Lamiglass and my Fenwicks fiberglass rods, I caught hundreds and hundreds of stripers with it. Why do I have to spend $100 when these are, you know, $20, $30 rods? So I got one in my hands and I'm playing with it, and then I finally bought one. And I never went back to fiberglass ever again. Wow.
So what were some of the qualities of the fiberglass rods? Like going from the cane to the fiberglass was more durable, but...
From Calcutta's, you mean days? Oh, it was day and night. Yeah. You know, the Calcutta's were like fishing with a broomstick, technically. But no, fiberglass rods, you know, Fenwick and Lamiglass were probably the main ones back in the day. And we were doing custom rods. In the 60s, one of the guys that I knew from Belmar, he introduced a golf tape on the back of the blanks. We would tape on our reels. And then, you know, I would, you know, wrap them myself, or then the shop started doing them, and they were the custom ones. You wanted custom rods back then. The store-bought rods were, you know, like, you know, cheaper looking rods, or not that they wouldn't function as well. So, and then, you know, they were, you know, very limber and flexible and everything, which was fine. But I liked the stiffer ones. You know, I would cut the tip on a lot of them to make them more meat stick for the jetties, because some of them would be too, you know, to lift the fish if you didn't want to gaff them, you know. Yeah. So you could lift the fish with more power. And then they tried boron for a while. I don't know if you ever heard that.
I remember boron fly
came
rods.
out. It never caught on. I think they did it more with fly rods back then. And then graphite, just, you know, the composite graphites and the full graphite blanks. And then, you know, I don't G. Loomis, St. Croix, all the good companies, Lamiglass, they all switched over, and even Fenwick. And
yeah, the graphite was lighter, more sensitive, and then more responsive too. And I guess more customizable to the actions. Like you could, depending on the thickness of the wall of it and the taper, you could change how that rod's going to act. So whereas the fiberglass rod, I'm sure you could do that to an extent. But
yeah, it was more versatile, you know. And then it was great for all types of fishing. And the sensitivity was way better than, let's say, a fiberglass rod, which was more forgiving. You felt every little twitch with a graphite rod. But then, you know, the other game changer at that time frame, braided line, definitely changed the way we fish today. I know I did a seminar in Bordentown at Sportsman Center.
Oh yeah.
And I did a talk, and I'm done with my talk, and I'm walking around the showroom there, and this guy, Jim Bramble, had what they called Power Pro. And he goes to Shelly, "You ever see Power Pro before?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh, it's a braided line, you know, 6-strand, 8-strand, something." And I go, "Braided line, like Dacron or something similar?" He goes, "No, it's this stuff here. It's a Spectra kind of whatever thing." And he goes, "Feel this." And I go, "Okay." He says, "What pound test do you think that is?" I go, 10, 12. He goes, 50. I go, "Jim, send me a spool." So he sent me a spool of 1,500 yards, and I put it on an outfit, and I ended up going down to Barnett's North Jetty, and at that time I was using a Lefty lure, which is a famous custom plug maker. I made a cast. This is like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. The sun's up and everything. I was field testing the line a little bit, and I hooked a good sized fish. It wasn't, you know, a monster, but I figured 20, 30-pound fish, which is a decent fish.
Oh yeah.
And I'm fighting it, you know, putting a little extra pressure, and the hook pulled. And I'm going, I don't know about this line, you know. It really didn't have a lot of give, or I didn't know. So I seen him the next day, and I told him, and he said, "You got to loosen the drag a little bit. You were way too tight, and if it's not hooked really good, you're going to rip the hooks out of them." And that's exactly what happened. So I did exactly what he told me, and then the future outings was using it, and braid is on every one of my rods today.
I can't go back. I cannot go back to monofilm, with the exception of like center pin fishing or trolling for tuna.
Right.
I use braided line on everything. But I first used braided line, hated it, Went back to mono for a couple years, and then went to braid for good. But my first braided line experience was old Berkeley Fire line, and it was a nightmare for me. It was tangles.
And some
knots
guys
wouldn't
love
go.
Fireline, you know, not to trash brands. I mean, I tried Suffolks, I tried Fins, I tried some of the other ones. I keep going back to Power Pro. It works, but I tell people, if you don't have issues with the braid that you're using, continue using it.
Yeah,
don't
switch it.
experiment. You know, you think you got to get the latest and greatest, you know, the slick, the this, the that. I go original Power Pro. I like 30 for my lighter outfits, 40, and then I'll do 50 in a canal.
I'm doing more of the 8-strand. So the way braided line works is the more strands, the smoother it's going to be. So if it's a 4-strand braided line, I'm not explaining. I'm explaining this more to the people
fine.
listening.
No, I'm learning too a little bit about it. You know,
but like the 4-strand is going to be more abrasion resistant, which you would think would be, that doesn't make sense. You would think more strands, but they're thicker strands.
Okay.
So the 8-strand, that's going to be smoother, cast better on spinning
lighter,
tackle.
but
it won't stand up to rocks as well.
Yeah.
But the 6 is kind of a good middle ground with that. The original Power Pro.
Braid is like, and into fresh water it changed too. I mean, you know, the guys today, that's all. You know, I may use a fluorocarbon leader behind it in fresh water if I'm, you know, largemouth bass fishing or something. But other than that, with the braid, then I just use a shocker. I don't tie direct. A lot of guys, I use a barrel swivel. I'm old school that way. I use good terminal tackle, though, with good clips. And the reason, you know, I have extra leader tied in my plug wallet, you know, next to my plug bag. A lot of the young kids today, they got their spools on their belt and this and that. If I'm in a situation where I got to change my leader real quick, you got to get it off that spool. You got to tie on a barrel or make a knot to knot line, which I'm not good at. You know, I need a magnifying glass to do it right. And then you're wasting 15 minutes to get back in the water. And sometimes that's the difference between making a cast and catching 2 or 3 fish while the other guy's fumbling around looking for the right stuff to get back in the water with, you know?
I'm the same way. I like the barrel swivel in the surf.
Yep.
Boat fishing, I like doing a line-to-line connection. But in the surf, I have the pre-tied things. And like you said, I'm back and I'm fishing faster than if I had to do another FG
especially
or
with these blues around, you know, it could hit the barrel swivel or you could, you know, get cut off real quick. And if you got to start messing around, it just takes too much time. And I don't know. I don't think you catch more fish by having a line-to-line leader system. Some guys, you know, they reel the snap into, the barrel swivel into the tip. You know, I don't find that happening once in a blue moon if you're not paying attention.
Exactly. It's my first couple trips of the season when I'm still figuring out my leader length that's too long.
Yeah, but once you know, even in the dark, I never really had issues with that, you know. But, you know, now with the Spros today and, you know, that type of barrel swivel, you're not sacrificing strength. You know, years ago it was like the Roscoe style that would be like 100-pound, and that was pretty big.
Yeah.
Now you can get 130-pound Spro that's micro.
Yeah, it's a tiny little.
And then like the tactical angler clips, we're using those. And, you know, these are different game changers. The other game changer was soft baits. You know, finesse fish, when that came out early on, you know, the Wikis were big time fishery. And that soft baits really came a long way. You know, as far as, you know, sluggos and the hoagies and storms and tsunamis.
I remember the craze when Storm Wild Eyes first hit, all the shad
bunker
baits.
color.
Yeah.
How good was that looking?
Oh, it was unbelievable. But they would lose the tail.
Yeah.
You would fish, if you cranked them in too fast, the tail would come off. And it wasn't even bluefish, but they were
the first one I saw was up in Suffern, New York. And they were loose. I forgot what shop had them. They had them in a bin. And they were the Storm version. Mm-hmm. And it was the bunker color. And I remember putting it in my hand. And I'm like, if this doesn't look like a bunker, nothing does. So we all bought them naturally. And then they caught decent, that color. But when they came out with the whiter versions and the chartreuse versions, they were more successful. Because it shows up in the water column, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a big white plug guy, chartreuse and white, yellow and white. And then the soft baits, bucktails, I want white, generally.
Just something that's going to stand out, the fish can see.
They see it. It's just simple. You know, that's how I look at it. You know, do they think it's a fish? They see that movement, and then they could zero in on it. They're going to try to eat it.
So are there any other game changers out there besides the soft baits? The soft baits that's a big one because that created such a massive category of lures. From the straight tails to the paddle tails to...
the other game changers, too, this is a little bit later into the 90s, like the metal lip swimmers that Lefty designed, these sealed plugs. Creek chub was like early on, and Bob Hahn. These were, and Danny's. They weren't through, they were through wired, but they weren't sealed. Then Lefty and his son Wade made one of the first sealed plugs in a metal lip swimmer. And naturally I liked them because they didn't, the cavities didn't get water in them, then explode. They were very true. You didn't have to fine tune them. Like some of the other ones, you had to fine tune, bend the lip up or down to get the action the way you wanted it. Where the sealed plugs, if they were built correctly, they swam as soon as you put them on your clip.
And Lefty was one of the first guys that people would line up for ahead. I feel like he was at the very start of the custom plug craze that's kind of ebbed and flowed over the last, 30 years?
He started in because I have some of his early ones, and he signed them, dated them. 1996 or 97 was the first ones. And at the Asbury Park Flea Market, that's where he was an Asbury Park member. And I would go there, and I bought them. And I did real well with them. And all my friends that would come to the flea market, I would grab them by the shoulder, and I say, you got to go to this guy's table. They're not cheap. Back then, they were like $12, and you could buy a bomber for $1.29. And then they'd go, all right, I'll buy one. The next year they would buy 4, and then year after year he got more popular, and then the line would be outside Convention Hall, and he would give tickets out. They would be online with a ticket so you could reserve a spot to get his plugs, and he would limit it to 4 a person, and he would sell out in 15 minutes.
It's incredible.
And the highest he ever sold them retail-wise at the flea market was $25.
That's a
bargain
today.
Today, I mean, I'm not bragging, but I had a lot, and over the time, I part with some of them and some of the funky colors. I get $125 for them.
Wow.
And today there's a lot of custom plug makers. I think Berkeley and Asbury at their flea markets, there had to be 25, 30 different plug makers with quality stuff, and that was another game changer. The epoxy finishes, the pencil poppers and the regular poppers, and naturally the metal lip swimmers this past year was a home run for everybody.
I mean, just the number of options you have now in terms of lures. Years ago, I mean, it was you either had your minnow plugs or a very small handful of guys making custom custom wood stuff.
No, there was none. And growing up, I was infatuated with creek chubs. Yeah. The surfsters, and that's where Bob Hahn changed he made the first surfster custom one. And then naturally Lefty was the first sealed ones. But the time frame you're talking about, no, there wasn't a lot. There was some of the old school Snook Bait Company and the Adam 40s. They were early 60s and maybe late 50s when they came out. I would, Stan Gibbs, I don't know when they started making metal lips.
Gibbs, I don't know.
I think a little later.
Yeah, I don't know too much about his history and what he was. I know that the pencil popper was one of his big ones. And I know that's also for years when you guys had the good bunker runs in here.
That was our goal. My whole bag would be pencil poppers. Yeah. Well, you needed a long cast. Yeah. And it was that tantalizing walk the dog kind of motion on. It developed strikes when nothing else would. If they were close enough, you would throw a metal lip swimmer because that was an easy target for them. But if they were way out, you made that longest cast you could, start working it side to side. And you weren't working it like a popper when you were bluefishing, a little faster. You would slow it down, and your reel was like a piston, and just twitching that rod back and forth, back and forth. And a lot of guys hold it above the foregrip when they're working that pencil popper. And it just a great lure for that time frame. And hopefully we'll see it in the next couple of weeks if those bunkers start showing up and the fish from Cape May start coming up this way. Raritan Bay already there's that activity, with the metal lips. And like you said, you got a nice fish yesterday on a
I did.
So that was a good story. That's not a bad sized fish.
That was a beautiful one, man. That was impressive. And to do it on custom wood as well was pretty cool. But the pencil popper bites, that was, I think of that as like late. Did that start in 2001, 2002? That it's like the bunker number. They started protecting bunker in the state waters in New Jersey. They wouldn't let the netters in anymore.
Right.
Were you a part of that?
Yeah. Well, that started. Prior to that, I remember we would get a week, maybe 2 weeks of bunkers coming through, and that used to be in June. The first sign of them, like the first week, full moon in June, the bunkers would come, up the coast from the south, wherever they were coming from, and then we would get a week or two of that, and then the netters would come in, wipe them out, and then it was like nothing. It was barren after that. So when they stopped that, what you're talking about, we had that I'm going to say it was 15 or 18 years ago when that first real good bite was. And people were going, what do you think? Is this going to repeat? And I go, that's never going to repeat. I mean, I've never seen it in, like 30 years of fishing. How is that going to repeat again? It was like once in a lifetime kind of thing. Then it was year after year after year after year for at least 12 or 15 years. And what happened, they started out in the 22 to 35 pound range. Then they were in the 30 to 40 pound range. And then the last 2 or 3, I call them the last of the Mohegans, whatever that year class was, because that ended up in the canal, Cape Cod Canal. Then it came back to the Shrewsbury Rocks, and then back along our coastline, and kept getting depleted because you were allowed to harvest them.
You keep 2 at 28, in those years.
Now, with the new regulations, it's going to definitely protect those fish, but they're all big. If you get into that body of fish that's on those adult bunker, 90% of them are like 35 plus, and a lot of them 40 pound and into the 50 pound range.
It's incredible.
And last year we had that week in October 8th, that week, and nothing went under 40 pounds that I saw caught. And
wow.
I had like 7 or 8 monsters. I had one real big one on. I couldn't lift it on a metal lip. And, but we were putting them all back. We wanted to get them back. We got some pictures of some of the good ones, but it was something.
And that was last fall, man.
That was last fall. That was the start of the best ever.
So that you telling me that makes me feel good, because so many guys I know, so many people fishing think the good old days are gone, man. But
no, I don't think so. Just being on the water like we did today when we were fishing, for bluefish, we caught one each, missed a couple. It's good fresh air, like you said, how many days do I fish? I try to go every day if I can, and it's just the way it is. But
now you guided for a few years. Do you still guide now?
I'm doing a little bit. I'm very selective. People that I've been out with a number of times, I'll book again. I'm a little older now, and it's not the money. It's you're fishing through somebody's eyes technically, and I'm not bragging. I was always a sharing kind of person. I loved the sport. It was, I would learn from friends. I didn't invent fishing. My dad introduced me to it. Some of my best fishing buddies taught me how to rig deal fish, how to fly fish, all of that kind of stuff is handed down. And that's important. But guiding, I could give you a good guiding story.
Well, that was coming next. I want to hear a couple of your best guiding stories. The highs and the lows.
The lows, we didn't catch anything.
Well, yeah.
But one of the early ones I did, and this is kind of cool. I'm down by the jetty with my wife. We're sunbathing. It was August, and a guy comes up to me and says, "Shelly, you do guiding?" I go, "Yeah. How you doing?" He says, "My name is Bob." I said, "How you doing, Bob?" He goes, "I want to go out with you." I said, "Okay. You thinking sometime in the fall?" He goes, "No, I want to go out with you this week if it's convenient." And this is August, I could have fluked fish or something like that, but he wants to do striper fishing. He says, "I haven't fished in a number of years. My tackle is all antiquated, fiberglass rods, reels from, the 60s, 70s. So I said, "There's really nothing happening." He goes, "No, you don't understand. I want to pick your brain for 4 hours.
Oh.
I go, "All right." So I'm showing him how to work, tie leaders, the braided line. I went through everything, graphite rods, different plug selection, taught them how to use different things, the shads, the metal lip swimmers, and all of this. So we were done. The following fall, I'm in Bayhead, walking the beach, and I see a guy up a couple hundred yards walking towards me, and I'm catching fish. I'm going, "All right, whatever." And he's getting closer and closer, and I'm going, "Oh man, I don't want to bull crap." I'm looking at fish. He goes, "Shelly." I go, "Bob." He goes, "Yeah, I just want to tell you that I caught 180 stripers this fall so far on all of your techniques." So that made me feel good.
Oh yeah.
So that was one little guiding story. And then there's times, people want to learn. And then we had, great trips with people. I had a guy I took up to Sandy Hook, and technically it's a 4-hour trip. And I said, it was epic. I mean, he caught like 25 bass and giant bluefish mixed, and he was from Pennsylvania, and he forgot his phone. He left it in my car, and he was worried that his wife would get scared because he told her it's a 4-hour trip. We left at 5 in the morning, and now it's like 2 in the afternoon. So I go, you can't leave. His name was Ed. I go, Ed, you can't leave. It's impossible to leave. You're never going to witness this. I'm saying this is like in the top 5 of me fishing. It was in the cove by the false rip and the bunkers. You could have walked on the peanuts.
Oh, man.
And every cast guys were bent, and there was plenty of room to fish. So that was a good one. But my favorite one is meet up with a brother and 2 brothers. Older brother booked a trip, and we're at Betty and Nick's having coffee, and I go, what are you looking to do? Bait fish, just, learn how to, to do some lure fishing, read the beach. He goes, I want to go out with you like we weren't with you. How would you do that? And I go, that's an interesting way of putting it, And I said, well, I'm going to get in my truck. I'm going to ride down. I'm going to get on, Gilligan's and start riding south, looking for bunker schools, bird play, bait possibly, any signs of life. So, I'm fishing artificials. We're riding, and I'm kind of point out, look at the water. If you see like a different ripple that's not normal, and it's a different look everywhere else, but in one spot it looks a little different, look for that. And we're riding, and then all of a sudden I notice a porpoise come through the water, and there was a school of bunker. And I go, oh, get out of the truck. So I hand the one guy a pencil popper, and I just kind of showed him how to work it. He caught on. He knew how to fish, but he caught on right away, working the pencil popper. So the other rod, I had a snag rig set up, and I made a cast, snagged the bunker, and it was on my Vaughn style, and I handed it to the brother, Bob. So I go back to the pencil popper guy, and he goes, Mike, and he goes, Shelly, do me a favor. My brother never got a keeper before. And I go, all right, I'll do my best. He's putting a little pressure on me. So I walk back to Bob, I'm sorry. And he had my Vaughn style, and he goes, Shelly, if something happens, how do I get that line on that roller? What do I got to do? Because I kind of walked him through that when I first snagged the bait. And I looked at the reel, and the line is peeling off like a machine's taking the line off of the reel. So I go, Bob, you got to run off. Do me a favor. Get it with your index finger. Get it on that roller. Let it get tight, and set the hook. So he did exactly what I said. So he starts fighting this fish, and I'm going, take your time. The rod's bent. It was my good setup was my 275 Vaughn style with a good size rod, a lot of backbone, and the rod's bent good. And I'm going, you got a decent fish there. Take your time. Not knowing how big, but I knew it was, I'm going to guess 30-pound range. And it's getting closer and closer. It's kind of low tide, a little bit of wave action. And I get it, and I see it in the wave. And I go, you got a nice fish here, really good fish. Take your time. Let the waves help you. And he did exactly what I said. A couple seconds later, another wave comes, and I go, let that wave help you. Turn the rod sideways and slide him up on the beach. He gets it there, and I look down on the sand, and I look at him, and I go, dude, you just got a fish of a lifetime. 55 pounds, 9 ounces.
Oh, man.
First keeper. He's ruined.
Oh, yeah, there's nowhere to go from there.
He never fished again. No, he has fished. He has fished. But, that was a pretty cool story for sure.
But there's 2 bass mounted in your furniture store in Dinette World. There's the 28-pounder, and there's one other.
That was my 50.
And that was that same year, right?
Same year. That was 2 weeks after. It was two Fridays back. A week ago Friday, that same June, and I had a guide also, and I was a young kid. And we were catching, there was not a lot of bass around that day, and we were catching about 2-pound bluefish on top water and metal, but we were snagging some bunkers. And, nothing was happening with that, but I put a couple of, fresh ones in my cooler. Figured I would use them maybe and chunk them or whatever. And now it's like 10, 11 o'clock, and the kid Chris, I said, listen, I'm off today. If you want to hang out and fish with me, you're more than welcome to fish all day. I'm not charging you more money to do that. And he goes, well, I'd love to. Thank you so much. So I put a bunker head on. I made a cast, and I said, you want to hold this, the bunker head? He goes, no, I'm going to snag a fresh one. He walks down the beach about 20 yards. He's not even 20 yards away from me. I get hit, and I set the hook, and then I got my 51-pound, 12-ounce, my first 50. Man. So that would have been 2 in a row for people.
Yeah, but the end of guiding
when I got my
season,
first one for that, not that I got it, but when the first one was caught, I called my wife on the phone, and my wife's super supportive. I mean, we're married 54 years and never I always tell this story. There's only 2 times she said don't go fishing. Once was we going to a bar mitzvah we had to go to, and our friend's best friend's wedding. They were the 2 times don't go, Shelly.
That's a pretty good track record. I usually get that in a week.
But I was trying to bring out a point though with what was I trying
you
to
called
say?
her about the first one.
Oh yeah, so I called her on the phone and I said, Bon, I got a guy a 55-pound 9-ounce striper on a guide. Her words, that is better than you catching it yourself.
Yeah.
That was her words. And it was true. But the funny thing is everybody was high-fiving me. But,
Well, they know. It's your knowledge, your experience.
I caught it through him, technically.
Yeah.
And, I helped put him on it and the whole 9 yards. But, I probably wouldn't have caught that fish if I didn't have a guide. I'll tell you why. Most of the action was north of where we were. And I wanted to be on the island because I could cover way more ground with my truck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was June. You're not allowed to drive to beaches, in those towns. So you would be, if I'm with people, you got to get out of the truck, bring your gear, go here, and then you want to be there. I figured we would have a better opportunity of scoring. And that was their goal. And it played out, and it was the right decision to make.
Oh, yeah. Man, I'll say. I'm sure Bob agrees.
Yeah, that's for sure. He was a good guy.
So best guess. Oh, maybe we'll get back to that. No, we'll do it. If you had to guess how this fall would play out after last year being one of the best fall you've ever seen, what do you think? What I know it's impossible to predict. But do you think it'll approach that? Do you think that is a once in a lifetime type of fall run, or do you think that maybe that's a trend of?
It'll be hard to compete with that, to be honest. I mean, I always tell people every year is different. It's not an exact science. It's dictated by the bait, the amount of bait, if it stays close to shoreline or it stays outside. I mean, there was falls that the boats did well and we didn't do that great. We had isolated cases where they would come in, wasn't as consistent. If we get sand eels, that's a different, ball game, and you could do a sand eel bite or a sand eel run this year. But typically there's so much bunker around and these spawns of bunker. To say that we're not going to have peanuts again to any extent, I'd be, if you're a betting man, I would say I would bet on the peanuts showing up. Will it be as consistent as last fall? I can't predict that. I don't want to say I would bet against it, but I think we're going to be close maybe to that. And I think the quality of fish will be the same quality because that body mass was, pretty big body mass of fish. So
there's so much that goes into the fall. The spring run always seems to be a little bit more predictable. They're going to show up reliably.
Right.
But in the fall, like if you get a storm at the wrong point, those fish that were coming down will just keep on trucking.
Exactly. And we were fortunate. We didn't have northeasters, like I think maybe one. And then after those 3 or 4 days, game on again. And then after that, it was none. We had them all the way into January 4th. That was the last ones that I caught with my buddy Sal. And they were all keeper size. It's like 32 to 34 inches. We were bucktailing and it was a little rougher to water. And this is January 4th. I mean, years ago, we were done the end of November. We didn't even fish in December because it was too cold and the fish were gone. So now it's, again, every year's a little different. You got to be prepared for it, and I try to, take it in stride that way and see how it plays out.
So you mentioned Sal. Sal, whenever I come down to fish with you, I always run into Sal. You guys have a great kind of network here, great bunch of fishing buddies that you see on a regular basis. We saw JM Basile today. Tell us about that, the importance of networking and just the friendships you've developed over all the years.
I think just growing up, I think some of my best friends ever, you're out of school and in contact, you get married and there's neighbors and, you're friendly to a degree, but fishing buddies became my best friends by far. You could count on them. If you need assistance for something, they're always there for you. They have a common interest, which is great. And, naturally the cell phone changed the way we fish. It really, way back, you would go into the tackle shops, they would write down in a book, what was caught. You would look and see, try to get a handle on what was going on, or you would call a shop and go, what's anything happening? Now, the internet and cell phones, if you've got a good network of friends, like, I'm fortunate enough to have, and we communicate and, we share. There's nothing better, Jim, than being side by side with your buddies and talking about those days on the beach. Like, you remember that day, every cast and this and that. And I think that makes the sport so wonderful.
That's been some of my most memorable times fishing with you. Not even just the fishing, but kind of the back of the
and
truck,
and
kind
we're
of
all
the recapping.
ball busting too. You know, you got to remember that. There's a lot of that going on.
Everybody's got a nickname. Everyone has a mean nickname, dude.
And we rag on each other. You know, I think it's just good-natured fun, and if you're the front of a joke, you know, you laugh and have a good time with it. But and they're all good fishermen, my buddies. You know, they're all seasons. Not saying that, you know, everyone is really good, you know, and they got a passion for it, and, you know, it's just the way it is. Thank God for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great community.
Yeah.
You know, great fishing community.
I know when we did one show, we were talking about all the nicknames and everything that guys have.
Yeah, there's some of them we couldn't even say on this. Some of the nicknames. Sure. I don't even want to know what mine is behind my back. Might have to do with my new mustache. So in addition to all the surf fishing that you do, I know you do a fair amount of fly fishing as well.
Yeah, fly fishing is an awesome way of catching striped bass. And how I got involved with fly fishing back, I'm going to guess like 35 years ago. I'm on the beach, and the limit was 10 fish at 18 inches. And I'm up by Gilligan's walking north towards the governor's mansion. And a guy, Richie King, local guy, good fly fisherman, good friend of Bob Popovich, who a lot of people know from the fly fishing industry and fishermen.
Yeah. Absolute icon of the saltwater
world
fly
renowned.
fishing. Yeah.
But Richie King was fly fishing, and I remember I had 10 fish I'm dragging on a schooler, a stringer, I should say. And back then we were selling, you know, getting 50 cents a pound or whatever. And it kind of like paid for some lures and stuff. But everybody was doing it. It was legal to do.
Yeah.
And I always said I would be the first one to put my name on the no sale. But back then it was legal, and we did it. And Richie King's fly fishing, and I'm watching him, and I'm going, man, he's working his butt off trying to cast. There was a little bit of wave action, and I'm, prior to that, I'm nearby, and I'm catching like crazy, and he's not getting anything. All of a sudden, I turn around, and he's bent, and he's fighting this fish. He lands a fish, and he holds it up to the sky, like to God, and yelling, hallelujah, hallelujah. And I go, that fish meant more to him than the 10 that I'm dragging. I got to get into fly fishing. I got to learn how to do it. So I'm on the beach, and Bob Popovich, naturally a fly fisherman, and we were friends. And I go, Bob, I want to get into fly fishing. Will you, help me and teach me whatever you can? And he said, yeah. And Bob is a super sharing guy, and I ended up getting one of my buddies made a fly rod for me. I got a blank from Midland Tackle, and we did a custom fly rod. I bought a Medalist reel back in the day, and got into it, and I got my first striper on one of Bobby's pattern little fly. And back then I couldn't even get a picture. I didn't have a camera, and you couldn't keep it because it was too big. It was like 32. You had to be 34 inches to keep. I think that one of those slots that we had. Oh
yeah.
So everything under 34, I think, had to go back.
Yeah.
And that fish was like 30 inches. I had to put it back, and I was like disappointed. But that's where I started fly fishing, and Bobby changed the way saltwater fly fishing locally is, with his designs, his epoxy flies.
Yeah, the surf candy and
bucktail deceivers, his bangers, all of that stuff is what we use. I keep it simple. Well, his patterns work. I don't have to tie all these other foreign-looking objects.
Yeah, there's probably no other bluefish topwater fly you need other than the Bob's banger, the surf candy for albies and stripers, and now the beast fly, and another one for the bigger fish.
But fly fishing, I carry my fly rod almost all the time when, like I'll start bringing it more now. It's usually set up in the truck. And if I have that opportunity to use it, I'm going to use it, especially in the surf, and the fish don't have to, they're close enough. A lot of people think you have to have that, cast over the sandbars. No, this time of the year, they're right in the wash. If that bait's around, they're going to get pushed up close. And if you're in the backwaters, it's an easy cast for sure.
Now, Island Beach, I know, has been your playground, I guess. For when did you start fishing Island Beach?
We moved down here in 1971, to be exact. But like I said, in '68 is when I was introduced to the needlefish, and I came down, not Island Beach, that was Seaside Park, but I also fished cut mackerel on the island. Mm-hmm. Somebody lent us a 4-wheel drive, and we went down there before the jetty was even built. It was just the sunken rocks were there.
Oh, really?
And the sandbars were all in the inlet. It was totally different look than it is today. People have no clue.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
As
So
if the inlet's not hard enough to navigate as it is.
No, it was when I say sandbars, I mean sandbars. Like, because it was just a sunken, where our North Jetty is, it was just sunken rocks, almost buried, a lot of them. And then that sand would just wash over there and it just filled the inlet. They would, have to dredge it, and it was shoaling and all of that. So you had to be a really experienced boater to navigate. That used to say it was one of the most dangerous inlets in the state, or on the East Coast, to be exact.
So for somebody who's never been there, what is Island Beach State Park?
Fisherman's paradise. It's not always happening.
Yeah.
But there's days I'll go and get out there and I don't score, and I'm glad I went.
Yeah.
It's good to get exercise, fresh air. You got ospreys getting bait. There's foxes. There's sea turtles in the backside. You see.
It's 7 miles of undeveloped
and then
coast there.
In the next couple of weeks, the weather's going to get warmer, and you're going to see pelicans, and we get a lot of pelicans.
Oh wow.
A lot. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of pelicans they're good to watch because they'll tell you where the bunkers are.
Oh yeah.
When they fly like 20 at a time, and they're all going north. Maybe I should be going there.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And I never thought to fish under. You don't think of pelicans as a bird you follow for fish in the Northeast?
No, definitely. And we get a lot of gannets too.
Yep.
And gannets more and more every year. We had them a couple of weeks ago, and they'll tell you where the bait is. And naturally, there's seagulls in the terns, and then the cormorants. But all of that's visual and it's nature. And what's nice, it's a barrier island. It's there's no houses, no, it's not commercialized in any way. It's all that natural beauty, and I think that's the big part of it for me.
And the structure there, I mean, you hear so much about the beach replenishment, flattening out the beaches and taking away the structure, not to mention the jetties that are all buried. But Island Beach being untouched, you have all the bars and cuts and holes.
And they're never going to touch Island Beach, from what I understand. They won't do a replenishment there for the simple reason, I think, and I'm not a engineer or anything, but Mother Nature has a way of preserving it. It's been that way for centuries. And naturally, there's times when it's up against the dune, it gets cut, and then it gets thrown back out, and then it gets back into the ocean, and the ocean coughs the sand back up and berms it up. Wind plays a big part in all of that. And if they try to change that, it could be devastating, and I'm hoping that never will happen, because there's, Monmouth County areas and Ocean County where they did the replenishment. There's certain vulnerable spots that after they do the replenishment, a year later, it looks like it was before they did it, or worse.
Yeah, you can't
control
the ocean,
You can't Mother Nature with it.
But just the structure down at Island Beach, like it is
beautiful.
so fun to go and then read, like, oh, like that looks like a great place. I want to come back there at high tide. Since you do so much of it, can you give us kind of a primer on how to read the soft structure, how to read the beach? Like if you were going to a new beach, not a nude beach, a new beach. If you're going to
I like the first one first.
I
have one up in Sandy Hook for your listeners.
Quick aside, when I was younger, there was one in Cape May, Higbee Beach. And it was also a good weakfish spot. My dad heard it was a good weakfish spot, so the two of us go there, and we're walking down with our pink zooms, looking for weakfish casting, and see a guy walking his dog. I'm like, that looks weird. Like he gets closer, and then my dad knows he's got no clothes on, walking his dog down Higbee Beach. My dad goes, "We got to get out of here." Like, all right. That was my last time to Higbee Beach. But
that's a cute story. But,
so if you were going to a new beach that you'd never been to before, what type of structure are you look at? Where are you starting? Where do you start with it?
The best thing to do is start at low tide. Mm-hmm. If you can, high tide, you're going to have a different water column. It's going to hide a lot of that. May not be as visible. So naturally, I'm mobile, so I could ride and see that. But if I'm not mobile, I would like to go on a low tide, walk the beach a little bit. If I'm in an area where I could drive and just look at the shoreline, I'm going to look at that also. Look for cuts. Sandbars are important. I'm always looking. If there's sandbars, I always want a hole that's in between it, where there's enough room for bait fish or the fish to swim in, and be in that zone. And then just wave activity, give you the way the currents are. And then there's times when you can look at it and it's dead high tide and you can't tell what that structure is. You got to prospect.
Yeah.
I'll just fan my casts, walk, drive to another location if possible. But I think the key thing is if you do it at low tide, you got a better chance of learning where that structure is, and then go back there the next time. And it changes though. Also, that's the wind and storms will play a part on where that structure is. You get prevailing winds that it could stay for a while in that same place. But if you get something completely different, it'll alter it.
That's part of what I like about the open beach fishing too, is like how fluid it is. How this, maybe right off A21, here's the spot. And then you go and a big storm comes through and that bowl you were fishing, that cut, it's gone. You need to find somewhere else.
Right. Well, and we only have one jetty, so there's a pocket there, and then you can fish the inlet side. But if you go more north, where jetty country we used to call it, unfortunately they notched a bunch of them, and some they covered up completely.
Yeah. So notching, just to explain, notching is where they took the base rocks out, the ones closest to the beach, because the reasoning was that jetties prevented the longshore drift, which as the sand naturally wants to move. What was it, north? So you have the buildup.
Usually the south side of the jetties had a lot of sand, the north sides were not as much.
So by notching it, they hoped the jetties that were blocking that off,
it would keep
just
it level,
or
a bigger, playing field of sand, if you want to call it that. But that became a good fishery for the guys like in Seagirt and Spring Lake, and some of the ones up north where they notched, because it had a nice current flow. When you had let's say, north to south flow, you would have a lot of whitewater and, in the shoreline there. And at this time of the year with the sandbows and the calicos, they're in there looking for that. And you could get them on the plugs too. But that helped a little bit. But, when they did the replenishment, it takes time for it to rebound, and it's different than it was when there was jetties where the bait would get pocketed and trapped. Now it's got that open shoreline, and they could just, 1 minute they're in front of you, the next minute they're, 200 yards away from you.
Those were magic bites in the early 2000s when the fish would get the bunker into the jetties, and you'd wait for that afternoon west wind.
And they never left.
Yeah.
They were there the whole afternoon, which happened last fall up in Seagirt. I had them pinned for the whole. I got there at 9 o'clock and left at 4 o'clock and left them biting. They never left because they couldn't. Every time they tried to move out, the fish would drive them back to that spot.
That's
and
incredible.
ambush them. But,
just getting out there, all the stuff you've seen over the years of surf fishing, man, it's amazing.
It's been very rewarding, and I hope to be doing it a lot longer if I can.
No trip to New Jersey surf fishing is complete without seeing at least seeing you, even if we don't get to fish together. But this has been great.
We've had good times together, and I hope to do some more in the fall. We get together again.
That'd be great.
And I hope your audience will enjoy this. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Shell. Thank you for everything, man.
My pleasure, Jim. My pleasure.